Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Arts Business Collaborative Rising Tides Research Institute Speaker Series event. We have on our call Monique Jarvis from LEAP, which we'll get to hear a lot about. And we have Ashley Renee Watkins, artist, facilitator. I'm so excited to hear about you and all the things that you are doing together. Today's conversation will be about conscious collaboration. One of the things that we have been exploring at ABC and on the Rising Tides research team is the way in which artists and arts organizations can better work together or better be intentional about the collaborations that they have together, how they occur, why they're occurring, what is the reason, and what is the result going to be. We're really interested in looking at how those instances where artists and arts organizations are collaborating together are rooted in values. How are those values aligned? How are they not? What are the way that we put those values into practice? And so we are super excited to have these two phenomenal people on the call today and sharing about who they are and what they do. Just a quick plug, if you're interested in learning more about Arts Business Collaborative, you can find out what we do and how we do it at artsbusinesscollaborative.org. There, you'll also be able to learn a little bit more about the Rising Tides Research Institute and our recent study on COVID-19 and the experiences of artists, arts businesses in the pandemic, both before and during. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our speakers today. Anyone can start. Feel free.
Monique, do you want to start?
You are muted. You would think after like 5,000 memes that wouldn't be happening anymore. But but anyway, Veronique, thank you so much. I'm really a fan of ABC's work and Rising Tides Research Institute, the work that you do. I think it's so relevant. I'm so thankful that Rising Tides exists. I think it's critical in today's world and will remain critical. So I'm really thankful to be a part of this discussion, and I'm absolutely honored and thrilled to be a part of this discussion with Ashley Renee Watkins, and I can't wait for us to delve into our dialogue. But before I do, just briefly about myself, my name, as you mentioned, Veronique, is Monique Jarvis, and I am a two-spirit Afro-Indigenous spoken word artist and vocalist. Was raised in a family where music was our first language, and so come from a long line of generations of musicians and artists. And for the past 15 years, I've been at a leading New York City creative youth development organization by the name of LEAP, which is an acronym for Learning Through an Expanded Arts Program. And I'm really excited to talk more about that as we get into our conversation. But just first wanted to offer, a brief introduction. Prior to working at LEAP, I was the managing editor of an African-American newspaper in Connecticut. And I bring that up to say my former life as a journalist, to say that it is there, that I really began to learn more about our experiences here in America, in this country. And it was really, and I would have to say that a veil was lifted, if you will, during my experience at the newspaper, but also during that time, and I'll dive right into full transparency, a very close family member was unjustly incarcerated. And there began my bone deep desire to really engage in justice and to really engage in activities and that promote justice, that promote equity. And so I began to really create spaces for youth within the structure of the newspaper. From a mentoring component, I began to go into maximum security prisons, conducting literary workshops. I began to really take my art form as a spoken word artist very seriously. I launched a spoken word venue, an award-winning spoken word venue in Connecticut for about 5 years. And it became, like a space for artists whose voice existed on the margins of society. It became a safe haven for them to really express themselves. So my work at LEAP is a continuation of that desire to promote equity and access to youth. And thank goodness that family member is now out of prison, but they were stolen from us for 10 years. And so I continue this work, to help, disrupt the school to prison pipeline and to be, a force in any way that I can, like I mentioned, to promote equity and access for our youth. So that's my brief, not so brief introduction. And then, I was able to get my master's in human services from Lincoln University, which further informed the work that I do. And I'll pass the mic to you, Ashley, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yes, it is okay. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to just hear a little bit about you, Monique, and I'm sure we'll learn more. And Veronique, I just want to thank you for inviting me into this conversation and into this space. And I'm really excited to just sort of delve more into what the topic that we're going to be talking about looks like. So a little bit about me. I am Ashley Renee Watkins. I officially found out that my legal first name is Ashley Renee last year. I've been using Ashley Renee for years, and A. Renee is my artist name, but then I never realized on my birth certificate that there's no comma between them. And so the government recognizes that as one name. And so I was like, oh, well, it's Ashley Renee legally too. So that's my fun name thing that I really love to own, because I think your name is so important, and names have always been a really important thing in my family. So my parents both fought for both names, so I honor them both with that. So a little bit about my background. I am currently a music curriculum specialist at the Juilliard School. I have worked for many, many years with Lincoln Center Education as a teaching artist, and it's sort of evolving from there a little bit, but I look forward to just continuing to see how that relationship grows. I've worked in arts education as a teaching artist for about 11, going on 11 years, solid 10, finally, I can say now. And with that, I've really been working, especially in K-12, and also working with adults in higher education as well. And that sort of evolved into consulting, where I work with some really wonderful individuals and do a good amount of work in facilitating conversations. Sometimes that's around arts institutions thinking about more equitable practices with the communities they serve. And sometimes that's at a more civic level, thinking about equity in arts and arts funding and access to arts at that level as well. That's work I actually look forward to sort of growing into in future phases of my career, because it really excites me. And as an artist, I am a trained opera singer, but I'm from New Orleans, so I've sang many things, including gospel and things like that, since I was a little girl, singing with my grandmother, who's the only vocalist that I know of in the family. And she made sure to foster that with me before she left this earth. So I'm very grateful to her for that. And I've been singing, and as of the last, I don't know how many years, I'm not going to count. COVID just messes your brain up. I have sort of evolved as an artist and still sing opera, still love it, still sing classical music, but now write and sing and songwrite pop music, R&B, neo soul for people who know what that is. And that is a extremely fun world to be in. And I'm just grateful that songwriting finally decided to touch me. I prayed for it for many years, and then it finally just one day it fell on me literally, and I'm addicted to it. So yeah, I think that's enough about me for now, and I look forward to getting into this conversation.
Thank you both for your introductions. I can say that before I leave you to the talk, I was listening to us and just hearing so many similarities, because I know Monique from our research study in the Rising Tides, and if Monique will allow me to probe a little bit, Monique is a singer as well. But also what is sticking out to me right now, which I think is really critical for this talk today, is this part about naming yourself, right? So I don't know how familiar either of you are with the Kwanzaa heritage, right? Mm-hmm. But the second day of Kwanzaa, which I actually have a tattoo about, is about naming yourself, right? That you are naming yourself for oneself. And it's something that myself as an artist, as someone working in the, arts organization space, is always thinking about, right? How do I continue to ensure that my work is staying true to my name, how I call me, how my mom calls me, who I am, right? So so I agree, Ashley Renee, it's not just about the fact that you have a label, right? But that it holds your power. So if you both would entertain that conversation just a little bit more and use that as a launching pad to talk about your work as artists and working with other organizations and how you engage it, I would love to hear about that. And Monique, if you could start, because I think it would be great to hear about your name, your actual name, which you talked to us about during Impact Lab as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And let me just say, Ashley Renee, that I'm going to withhold from making this an interview about your entire life, because I'm so curious and just in awe of what you shared. And the former journalist in me just wants to interview you.
Likewise.
So yeah, wow. Veronique, I know you're off camera, and I know this is you and I now, Ashley Renee, but I want to say that Veronique, really started us on a really profound entry point into this conversation. And so yeah, so I'm thankful for that. And what resonates with me right now is something that Veronique said, that, naming yourself for oneself, and then how your work then is, is about staying true to your name. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting to me about that, and I'll get into a little anecdote about my name, but like what's interesting to me about that is that I never really considered the correlation between my art form and my name. I really consider the correlation between my art form and my connection to the cosmos. And already I'm walking away from this conversation with more to interrogate. Mm-hmm. So what's that about? But I'll share what I shared in previous conversation in participation with Rising Tides Institute, Research Institute, and that is that my mother and my father went to the original School of Performing Arts in New York City. Yeah, in like the 60s. And my mother is a vocalist. She's an opera singer as well. And yes, that's why I'm just like, oh my goodness, the ancestors are bringing us together. But I'm not an opera singer. But my aunts were known as the Monk Singing Sisters, and they all just had these voices that I would wake up to, or just be around, that would just like, you just felt lifted and just completely out of body experience. And they have operatic voices. So I say all that to say that and then my father, my biological father, who's since been deceased, who's deceased, who's transitioned, was also a singer. And so my mom basically said that she named myself, and I have 4 brothers, but at the time 3, so that if we wanted to become artists, we could. And so in the household that I grew up in, on my mother's side of the family, it's predominantly artists. And on my father's side of the family is predominantly, professions that are more traditional, like attorneys, doctors.
Sure.
Right. And so when I grew up, I felt like, how most people are afraid to tell their parents, or that, I want to be an artist, or, I grew up afraid to tell my parents that I might not want to be an artist, or to tell my family, because everybody was an artist. It's just like, this is the language we speak. And so, that's my short story around my name. I would say, currently I take pride in my name because, this is the name that the vessels I was blessed to come through named me. But I would, and I take pride in my name in terms of like, we have, very strong ties to our names, like, both Monk and both Jarvis, in terms of like a very it's a connected tissue. We obviously build community and meaning from our names, but if I'm going to be transparent, I would say that I am at odds at having a very European name. So that could be part of why, and I hope my mom never sees this, but anyway. but so that, I think that might be part of why I never really connected my name that's to my art form. So yes, that's just a little anecdotal story about how prominent the arts were in my family. That my mom wanted to make sure if we were to become artists that we had names that were stage worthy.
That's so interesting. I don't know why. I think my mom named me, no lie, from a soap opera. It's not the greatest.
Okay.
But I just remember when I was growing up that my dad would always call me Ray Ray or Renee, because that's the name that he really wanted for me. And my mom, would call me Ashley, but they never honored both. And when I became an artist, I found that that was an opportunity to actually start using. So Ashley Renee is almost that name, which is my name, sort of birthed with my artistry.
I see.
So when I was trying to sort of figure out, how do I want to be named? How do I want to show up as an artist? Ashley Renee was my choice. And nowadays, names are so important because it's how people find you. So
right.
and I can't tell you. There's depth to it, but there's also just how when I'm engaging with institutions, or when I'm engaging with anyone, and I notice if I don't own my name and if I don't speak up for it, I won't be named the way that I would like to be, because I can't tell you how many times I will say Ashley Renee and the Renee just goes away. But I know that that's a part of my identity as an artist, and therefore just a part of my identity. And I also know it's how you're going to find me. So I'm like, if you put an Ashley Watkins into a search, I don't know who's going to come up, but it won't be me. If you put
Ashley Renee
or Ashley Renee Watkins, then there are several things that come up that I'm very proud of and represent my work, and that I want to be known and to be seen. And so it's that's why it's important to me. And it's also the my parents sort of honoring both of their voices within me.
Yes.
That was like the impetus for it. And then it has sort of evolved now to be very much so a part of my identity. It is my artist. It is very much so the the front line of my artistic identity, because it's how you find me.
It precedes you even.
It precedes me, and I want it to precede me. I want people to say, "Oh, you're Ashley Renee Watkins."
Yes.
Before they've ever met me, they know my name.
Yes.
And so, you know, when people program me or something like that, and then I've gone a step further. Now I'm A Renee. I've just made things so complicated.
Listen, the universe is not static.
Well, I had to, because Ashley Renee was claimed by a different artist, different kind of artist, that I'm just not in that field. I'm not in the field of work, and it's actually not a knock, but it's claimed. So that's why I sort of exist in these dual identities of Ashley Renee Watkins, arts administrator, A Renee, artist.
I'm glad that, you know, you found a way to still be able to integrate it and still hold the meaning of Ashley Renee, you know, and A Renee.
Yeah.
You know? And you know what's coming to mind? Oh, go ahead. I didn't interrupt you. Did you? Yeah. You know what's coming to mind, because I, prior to this conversation and speaking about, you know, what tonight's dialogue would be about, one of the things that came up in my conversation with Veronique was how are organizations and institutions like LEAP supporting artists, and how, and where are the opportunities for growth, and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I feel like this conversation right here is so simply, it's simple. Not in the traditional connotation of what simple means, but it's profound, right? Because if we're talking about like some of what you just said, like really resonates in terms of what organizations can do, and the value they can bring into the space in terms of elevating and celebrating and honoring teaching artists they do. And so when you said, you know, I want to be seen, I want to be known, you know, I want folks when they hear Ashley Renee Watkins, you want the power of your name and your accomplishments and what you do and the visibility to be seen. And so and so I'm thinking to myself, wow, that is profound. And that's kind of like where it starts. Right. I know that, you know, we get into meetings and in our Zoom spaces, and now in our in-person spaces, we have whether it's a learning lab with teaching artists, whether it's, you know, the first day of a program or what have you. one of the, we have these icebreakers around exploring identity and elevating identity and the different expressions of identity. And so this is really resonating with me in terms of like, this is what organizations need to do. And I'd love to explore, if we have time, some of what LEAP does to center artists, right? But something as profound and as centering as your name and what it means to you. Yeah, and so it almost feels like the entry point to a blueprint of what it looks like to center the artist. And I'll just tack onto that really quickly, is like, as teaching artists, the expectation is, and as a former teaching artist, who still would love to be a teaching artist, and the expectation is to be able to have a learner-centric approach to the communities that we are blessed to serve, and so the children that we're honored to serve, and so I guess the question then begs, like, how are we centering teaching artists? If we're expecting teaching artists to center youth, then then organizations have to center teaching artists. And if we're expecting, teaching artists to show up in spaces and foster empathy, right, particularly now, then we have to replicate that in our instructional models, or in our governance models, rather. So, and there's a lot that LEAP does, but I'd love to.
No, I mean, that's actually something that I have literally uttered very similar words to that, to someone who I've worked with, who brought me into the world of teaching artistry. She's a mentor of mine. And so it was just it's like, I was like, were you in this conversation, Monique? How did you, did you hear me saying this? Because I have found that a lot of institutions, especially if we're talking about teaching artists, so many institutions, especially some of the larger institutions, will sort of chase the programming, sometimes chase the dollar, and do the programming in spaces that they have not traditionally worked in. And there is, before you ask, you hire artists, and you do a lot of identity-based hiring, which I don't have, I love that.
Right, right.
But then you sort of take for granted the amount of thought and preparation and that goes into actually doing the work that you've signed on and signed on teaching artists to do. And there is often an ask of teaching artists that is not offered to them themselves. So when we're doing, professional development and we're doing training, those are opportunities to do the exact responsive work that you're asking teaching artists to do in learning spaces. But that's not always, it's sort of like laid out as you have to be responsive and here are the ways to do it, but it's presented in a way that is not responsive itself. So I always say that, as artists, as learners, we'll look at learning styles and we'll try to honor learning styles in students, but I think people forget that stays with you in your adulthood. So, if you're more of a visual learner as a student, you're probably still a strong visual learner as an adult. And so everything is sort of presented in usually written, written oral, and that's about it. And there's no differentiating in the training, in the preparation work itself. And so you talk about UDL, you talk about differentiating, and you present it in one form, and then say, go do it.
Yeah. Right. And therein is the disconnect and the tremendous opportunity, right, for growth. Yeah, your laugh was like infectious. You're like, and go do it. Yeah, I would have to say I'm proud, and also both humbled at the approach that LEAP has been able to take. I would say in the past, where it was 2022. So I would say that's 6 or 7 years. We have new leadership. And one of the first things leadership did was one of the first things we did as an organization together was a theory of change, kind of interrogate, the DNA of our mission statement. And our mission statement is about fostering equity and access to the arts for New York City children. And so, and I want to say underserved in the arts. I hesitated there because we're also thinking about what does this word underserved mean? And we're now examining our language from an asset-based perspective.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, but I will say post the tragedy that was and continues to be the execution, and I want to warn those who are participating here tonight with us, and also in conversation with you, Ashley Renee, that I am going to mention George Floyd respectfully, may he rest in power and peace. But post the execution of George Floyd and many others like him before him and after him, like many organizations, we had to stop, pause, and really examine our practices.
Sure.
And and prior to that, we had already launched our theory of change and already began to get into the implementation stage of our theory of change, which really essentially is like, we believe in the arts. We realize that the arts are critical to social emotional learning and development of our youth. And we believe that the arts is a powerful tool to achieve access and equity, right? So with that being said, there began a data collection around, sorry, you're like, okay, data, okay, now we're talking. So there became, we really elevated in such a data collection around the youth experience and, but not just at the learner level, but also at the instruction, and the staff experience. And so we partnered with outside evaluators, Hello Insight and another, and YouThink, and we partnered with them to really create, observation tools and survey tools that would help us as an organization gauge where staff were on our pedagogical approach, the level of confidence that they had, the correlation between the level of confidence that staff felt they had in our pedagogical approach, and student outcomes. We found that there's a deep correlation between that. And so informed by that research, we've been able to create learning labs that really meet the teaching artists where they say they need to be met. Now there's need to be met. Now there's always opportunity for growth. But in tandem with that, like many organizations, we begin to center racial equity and shared language around what is equity. What do we mean by diversity? What do we mean when we say justice? We can't assume that we all mean the same thing. And so we've been integrating these concepts around racial equity and around access into learning labs, into making sure there's adequate representation at our board level, adequate representation at our learner level, at our governance level. And so I'm happy to share that as a former teaching artist, as an artist, as an Afro-Indigenous woman who is really committed to racial equity, I'm happy to say that I found a home in LEAP, more specifically in the last 5 to 7 years, where we're saying these things out loud, and we're tapping into our teaching artist cohort to find out how we can do better what we do, and in a way that like centers and values the teaching artist, while at the same time centers equity across many dimensions of DEI. So that's been a great eye-opening experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so important to do that, because it means that you have a place that is taking care of everyone. And, you know, I think that that's so beautiful. I actually just want to learn more about LEAP now. You know, what your, what does this look like? And I think that's because, you know, I think so much pressure is put on teaching artists to just go out and, you know, there are so many institutions that take this sort of like savior role. And I'm like, what is that? What are you asking? Like, students are far more astute and smart, and they are much better at being collaborators than, and there is so much that we can learn from them in order to better program for them. And I think it's just important that everyone is sort of heard, accounted for, and taken care of. And that just sounds like it's just much more fruitful programming. And yeah.
Yeah. You know, what, you know, what's kind of like, what has become more noticeable now is that, because some of our program, well, not some of our programs, many of our programs, particularly our signature programs, which involves like multidisciplinary programs around public art, obviously dance, musical theater. But what we're finding is, as LEAP is creating this safe space in this environment where, you can say out loud without fear of retaliation, or without fear of any kind of punitive measure. You can say out loud, in your learner spaces, things that really speak to racial equity, things that really speak to justice or social justice issues, whether it's our public art, where kids are exploring social justice issues and then creating a visual representation of that, whether it's our musical theater that looks at like, our musical theater productions that involve our young artists, have looked at like the 1963 Children's Crusade, have looked at like, women's suffrage through the lens of intersectionality. These are the kinds of things that our youth are working on, and that our youth are being encouraged to work on, that have shared they want to actually work on.
Yeah.
And so what we're finding is that there are these spaces now where, that some of the concepts are being challenged, because I think that, educational, institutions may not be as used to hearing it out loud in classroom spaces. You know what I mean? And so there's this intercession, if you will, of like really being able to support teaching artists, really being able to support social justice work, I would say, through the arts, and really being able to support like advancing equity and access to the arts. There's this space where we're learning, okay, what does it mean to support a teaching artist who goes into a school, who's teaching about the 1963 Children's Crusade, and is, countered with, maybe countered with, you have to excuse me, I'm on vacation in Puerto Rico right now, so I'm gonna get on my vacation mind. But it's counted with like, a mindset that is kind of like, born out of dominant cultural norms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess that's almost like a question to you, Ashley Renee. You said, that you're noticing that like there's a lot of like identity-based hiring, and what would you say is like a way to really support teaching artists who are bringing their identities fully and 100% to the learner space, particularly for those who might be speaking to racial equity or social justice or.
I mean, it's a dance, because, and I really think it depends on the learner space. It depends on the learners. If we're talking about that responsive piece as well, because I have done some residencies where I have, introduced the African diaspora to students. And I have done it in ways that I knew it would be jarring to some students because they really just didn't know sort of the depth of distribution of African, people and how far they went and where they went. And so I had to get a little bit of support from because I knew it was going to bring up some conversation. So it was quite a few students from some of these areas that weren't fully aware of the African presence within the history of the African presence within the area. Yeah. And so some of the students were like, wait a minute, is that me?
Right, I love it. I love it.
Right. So it was like, from an institutional standpoint, I, was very grateful to just be able to sort of talk through that work ahead of time. And I knew that it was going to bring up conversations with students. And it did. And it was very productive. And, it was, for me, it was, a nice balance of not assigning identity to students, but sort of just opening up this information, and if questions came up, fielding what I could, but also pointing to let's go home, have some conversations, and we can keep having conversations here. And so it really was about, because we were talking about a particular rhythm that sort of showed up in different areas, and how it had been sort of transported to these areas and who brought it to these areas, and how it took on, the clave took on different identities within different areas that were all eventually populated by enslaved Africans. So I realized for a lot of the students that they just thought that was American history. And they were seventh graders, but they just hadn't encountered it yet.
Sure.
And so I felt empowered, for one, by my organization to do that work. They trusted me. And there was some support that was, in turning in curriculum and just having conversations and things like that ahead of the sessions. But it was more so that I just felt trusted. As a long time, I would say a long time in my lifetime, it's a long time. Long time teaching artists, and, just working with students. They trusted me. And so in that instance, it was that, but also on the flip side, I was working on another residency, and I wanted to come at, access and equity, not from so direct point. I wanted to do a little bit of, social emotional work with some sixth graders through songwriting. And so there was the assumption that it has to be about, well, it's going to be about something, racial justice, social justice based. But I wanted this to be more organic for students. And I wanted it to feel like something that really, really sparked in them. And I didn't want them to feel forced because that's another thing that sort of happens, especially with Black and Brown populations, is that you sort of get forced to look at your oppression. You sort of get, and there's a balance. There is an awakening and things that we can address. But sometimes students want to bring up what they feel oppressed about as individuals, or what they feel joy about as individuals. And I think that that's all a part of the work.
Yes.
And so I would say from an artist and a teaching artist standpoint, of feeling empowered to not pigeonhole the work as well, so that sort of that same freedom, that same awakening comes from tapping into the individual students and what wakes them up every day, what gets them going every single day, and tapping into their individual humanity and their individual existences. And I have to say that that was one of the most powerful, and it was just before the pandemic. And I'm so grateful for it. And I hope those students held it. It was one of the most powerful units I've done. And it was just a six lesson residency on real authentic songwriting. And being in a writer session, like if I'm in a room with other songwriters, recreating those kinds of sessions for students. And I have to tell you, by the end of the residency, talk about buy-in. I brought in an engineer friend of mine, and the students were so invested in their own process and in the process, which I think is a part of work too, just awakening to process.
Yes.
They were so invested in it. We were worried because the engineer, we didn't have recording booths. So everything was going to have to be, he set up his mic, his whole studio setup, portable studio setup in a classroom of 30 kids. And we were going to have to record individuals singing into the mic. And so we were like, oh, it's going to be noisy in the background. Yeah. We did this for 6 classes. 6 times you could hear a pin drop every time a student was at the mic.
Wow.
6, I have the video recordings. I will never delete them. I will never lose them, because it was so quiet in the classroom. All the students understood the assignment of like, you have to be able to hear yourself. And after each time, like each representative that would come up and sing whatever portion of the song the class had written, there was this big eruption of cheer. It was the greatest like sense of community, all those things that we're working at all the time.
Yes.
Yes. And it was there.
Yeah.
And they were celebrating themselves. They were celebrating each other. They were learning recording lingo. Some of them had to like punch some stuff, and like it was like straight on artistry.
That sounds so powerful. That sounds, when you talk about high impact engagement, that, you know, the fact that I was there with you and you're like, kids walked up to the mic, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, that is definitely, you know, that definitely speaks to like high impact engagement. You know, one of the things that you mentioned, you brought to mind an experience that I had as a spoken word teaching artist when I started with LEAP. And, you know, I had been working with this class for a little, you know, for this activity for a little while. And the students kept coming back, but I just didn't get the sense that they were connecting to the art form, which speaks to my, you know, my approach with the students. You know, it's all that's all me, and in terms of like, you know, opportunity for growth at that time. But you know what I noticed is I took these kids to the New Eurekan Poets Cafe for a National Youth Poet Spoken Word series.
Oh, I love that place.
Yes, New Eurekan. And Ashley Renee, when I tell you, these kids got back from seeing youth just a little bit older than them doing something full on, like, so these are youth from all around the country engaging in this art form. And these kids came back, and the next time I saw them perform, I saw them. They had dropped inhibition. They had, you know what I mean? And so it really speaks to the power of youth, being their own resource, right? And obviously the power of peer-to-peer engagement, which kind of brings me to there's something else that you said that I thought that was interesting. You had given an example of when you felt really empowered and supported by your organization, to manage the content that you were bringing into the learner space. And during the time that I just shared with you, when I was a teaching artist at LEAP, and I was, working the spoken word after school, club, and what LEAP didn't have was this like pedagogical approach that was informed by the research that informed by the research that our evaluation partners had done. And so now what we have are these 6 experiences that all, through learning labs, teaching artists are exposed to and bring themselves to their own interpretation of. But these 6 experiences that range from like engaging peer-to-peer, authenticity, authentic engagement, valuing identity, making space for individual youth voice, expression, identity. And so these 6 experiences, you just made me think of it when you mentioned that you were supported by the organization, because it reminded me of a time as a teaching artist with the organization where it wasn't codified or standardized, right?
Yeah.
And now that it is codified and standardized, whether it is racial equity, whether it is social justice, or whether it is not related to racial equity or social justice, and is these 6 experiences create this container and create this framework that allows for not necessarily teaching artists to teach in the learner space, but to facilitate and to co-facilitate with youth. And so I'm just recognizing how important that is now when we're talking about, the recovery phase, which is not a phase, the recovery that our youth are engaging in now post-pandemic, and will engage in some way, shape, and form probably well into their adult years. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that we actually call it the LEAP way. I'm looking at it now because I'm thinking about it now because, when we first kind of engaged with the LEAP way, when the codification was first introduced, and we're all part of that, we're really looking at it as like, this is what happens in the learner spaces. But, now we're kind of looking at it as this is what happens. This is what happens between Monique Jarvis and Ashley Renee Watkins. This is what happens whether we're kind of like engaging with board members, whether I'm engaging with potential donors. It's kind of like these 6 experiences are kind of becoming like the core of our DNA.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's important to, you made me think about something that's not fully directly related, but it's the idea of even within those very codified structures, the space for self and identity and things of that nature. So, I dabble. I train other teaching artists as well. which I did a lot during the pandemic, and then Juilliard got me full time. So I'm making my way back into.
They beat us to it. All right, go ahead.
But I'm making my way back into doing more, sort of passing it on while it still feels fresh to me. And one of the things that I have always sort of emphasized, especially to new teaching artists, is that importance of creating a standard and a codified approach that, oh, I think we're at time, creating a standard and a codified approach that is so well structured that it leaves so much space for flexibility and all of the beautiful possibilities. Because I've worked with so many artists that go in without a plan and just sort of trust what the organic thing is gonna be.
That's a nice way of saying winging it.
Right, winging it, which is, it does you no good and it does students no good as well.
Right.
If you're winging it, then the winging it needs to be planned.
Right.
As well. And I think students appreciate that. I think they appreciate that you thought about them, that you thought ahead about them, and that you have something for them, and that within that plan, you're asking something of them. I see students as collaborators and co-creators and co-facilitators. And I often, I did one unit where I had them to lesson plan themselves and create an artistic experience for each other. Ooh. And I pulled back the veil of the curtain of teaching artistry and said, this is what we do. This is how we do it. When is a moment where you felt like was a great teaching moment for you and you're at any point in your life, and then recreate, that formula and, teach your colleagues this artistic skill that you want to bring to them. So we had students that I didn't even know played piano, teaching a group, conducting a piano lesson and conducting a choreography lesson. And so my guide was just to help them in the planning phase, and think about the facilitation steps, which I thought just built a bridge between teaching and learning for everyone in the classroom. And that was one thing I can say for my institutions are they let me experiment.
I love that. I love
within
that.
structure. So it's within, it's within the structure, but there's still that, I want to try this and I want to privy the students to what I'm trying. And I want them to teach me if this works, if this is good teaching, as well. So I don't know.
I love that. I actually wrote that down. If you don't mind, I'm stealing that from you.
No, absolutely.
I know we're at time. I had one more question for you, and I don't know if we'll be able to go over, but well, we are already over. But before closing words, I wanted to ask you if you could list. I know this is putting you on the spot. Putting you on the spot, and you don't want to engage. Let me know. But in today's world, knowing the importance and the transformational power of the arts, being a teaching artist yourself, what would you say are 3 things that organizations could focus on in terms of supporting teaching artists and meeting them where they are now, towards achieving student outcomes, towards achieving outcomes with those who are basically in the classroom and in the learner spaces?
The first thing I think is for organizations to have a teaching identity themselves, and to do that work of offering that, as you said, sort of codified approach to teaching artists to work within. I do think that's important. To have that and to do that work, if it's even with consultants before you work with teaching artists or while you're working with teaching artists, to get an identity for yourselves first. Because then that gives a teaching artist the sort of empowerment to say whether they want to engage with you as an institution or not. It's an exchange. It's certainly not just teaching artists. It has to be an agreement. So I'd say that is one thing. I think another thing is, and it's something that you're doing, which is just practical training and support in a safe space to try things out and to fail and to succeed and to feel celebrated. This is not, it's not hard work because, oh, the kids are this, that, or the other. It's just hard work because it takes a lot of thought and hours to put into it. Right. And I guess that leads me to the last part is pay. Pay teaching artists for every single moment that you have them, and think ahead on just, I feel like there's probably not enough funding and fundraising in the world to truly account for how many hours goes into the actual prep work that a teaching artist has to do. But I think institutions can get as close as possible and really think about scale and think about it from that perspective. So I think it's greater to have a very powerful, smaller force that is doing really great work and building really great footprints than a larger force that can't quite be as focused on, I had an institution, that had 500 teaching artists on roster. There's no way you can ensure any kind of codified approach with 500 individuals on roster. And you also can't pay what needs to be paid.
Right. No, I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I think it's a question for institutions to first think about scale from their perspective, and then how that impacts pay. So if it's scaled up too fast, too soon, then you're going to say something.
No, I was going to say, yeah, infrastructure matters. Well, first of all, thank you for even entertaining that question, considering this is a dialogue and not an interview. Even as I said it, I was like, is this the space for that? But I was just so intrigued by your experiences and humbled by them as well. So, but yeah, thank you. But you're right. Infrastructure, it's so fun. And I know we're going to go,
yes.
One of the first things that happened 5 years ago is infrastructure, where, we intentionally built a program excellence department to really be able to provide professional development and support and what have you, and intentionally built structure around leadership support for like teaching artists. So I appreciate those 3 pillars that you just shared, and look forward to really being able to think about them critically in support of the work that we're doing. Ashley Lene, I know we're at time. I'm going to get your number so we can call and continue the conversation. No.
Yes. No, that's a joy to talk with you, Monique. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. The same. I enjoyed learning from you. Well, I hope our paths do cross. Please do look us up. I would love to see what a potential connection or partnership could look like. And once again, Veronique, thank you so much for having me. And Ashley Renee, it was wonderful meeting you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all who were listening. I hope, I know there weren't any questions, but I hope something was a little bit of an earworm for you today.
All right. Well, have a good evening, everybody. And Ashley Renee, I hope we'll bump into each other soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye.